the cloud. Now we're recording. Please ask questions. You can ask in the chat. You can ask privately in the chat. You can ask, I encourage you to ask publicly. You can ask verbally. Ask questions. If you don't ask questions, then I don't know what I'm saying clearly or not clearly. Don't assume that you should understand what I'm saying. Just ask, right? Even if you haven't gotten somewhere in the curriculum, just ask anyway. And I'll do my best to give you an explanation. And if someone asks a question in the chat and I don't answer it within some reasonable amount of time, please let me know. Somebody speak up and say, hey, Howard, you missed it. You missed something in the chat. Because I probably did. I probably missed it. It's not that I'm trying to ignore the great questions that come into the chat. So please ask questions, and let's get started. So I'm going to open up our application, or I should get our application running here. Rails S. Here we go. I've got my code open. And let's see. I'm going to open this up full screen. Let me know if you can or can't read what I have in my source folder. I know I'm going to need app. Is that big enough for everyone right there?
Yep.
Good enough? Okay. Let's pull this over. Oh, it didn't work. Cool. All right, so now I've got a browser running. I've got my server going, localhost 3000. I'm going to open up my dev tools. And those are definitely tiny. Let's get those a little bigger. Whoa, everything's tiny here. Okay, that's better. Cool, and that's a little better. Cool, all right, so the first thing I'm going to do actually is, I don't like that this is all to the left. Does anyone know how I can make this spread out across the whole top? Any thoughts on that?
Span?
What's that?
Is it span?
I could use a span. I could wrap the whole thing in a span. Let's try that actually. So if we go to my nav bar, which is what that component is that we're looking at, I could change this from a div to a span and save that. Let's see if that does it. And it still seems to be left for some reason. And I am using Flexbox, so this is a Flex container. So I'm going to Google use Flex using Flexbox. Right? I'm going to look this up and kind of see what comes at me. Span is a good idea though. Span. I like that suggestion. It just didn't seem to work in our case. So if we just drop into like W3 schools, and I'm a big fan of MDN. W3 schools is pretty good for HTML and CSS questions though. And I've got my Flex direction here, and here's an example where it says justify content center. And I think justify content is going to work for me here for my Flex container. So I'm going to come back. And it's navbar that is my Flex container. If I look in app.css, and Flex direction, I have row, and I think what does it say? It said justify content, right? And if I do, whoops, let's try space between. Let's see what that does for us. And now it's kind of spread out across, which means I can get rid of these kind of annoying little hacks that I put there to try and keep those links separated, which is really nice because I really don't like them at all. So I'm going to grab those and delete them. And to me, that just feels a little bit better. Cool. So let's look around at what we have here. It looks like we're still logged in, which is great. I can see my trips. I can click on new trip. If I go to my trips, I can try to edit one of my trips, which is good. And this form populates. And this is kind of where we are if anyone was here before. But now when I click on new trip, right, if I went from editing to new, this is not good. If I click on from edit to new, now my URL says new, but I didn't change my state of my Redux. So I'm still populating this information. So let's kind of pick up where we left off. And let's see. So let's open up. Oops, no, I don't want navbar anymore. I want app. App is my main container and it's my main router. So this is where I've been defining my routes. And we've gotten to the point where we've added this edit trip form wrapper component and a new trip form wrapper. And the idea here was I'm using my one trip form for everything. So this trip form is getting smaller and smaller. If you've been here, you've seen that happen. And I'm splitting it. I should say I'm going to render this trip form from one of two children at any given time. Excuse me, from one of two parents at any given time. Either my edit trip form wrapper or my new trip form wrapper. So when I route from app.js to /trips, either /new or /id/edit, I'm going to render that wrapper component. Okay, and I'm calling it a wrapper because it's a component that's going to wrap another component and render that component. And if we looked at either of those, new trip is a little bit simpler. Notice that it renders the trip form. It's passing along history, and it's passing along handle submit, so that I can submit this thing. And I believe we got this working. We can double check that here in a minute. And my edit form wrapper has to be a little more complicated, and this is where we need to pick up. I don't believe we've finished this. I think we're kind of in the middle of figuring this out. And so far, what we've decided was in the edit form, some of the differences is that I need, first of all, a trip, right? Because I need to be able to populate the form. And when this edit form loads is when I should populate it. So I created this new action called set form data for edit, which populates the edit form with that trips information. That's what it's supposed to do anyway. And right now, so far, I have a handle submit that attempts to invoke update trip, which is an action creator. If we look in my trip form, no, in my trips, split this to the right. Hopefully, there it is. And this action creator should be sending a patch request. And let's clean this up a little so we can actually see these things. Clean this up. This is at play right now, update trip success. Get my trips, no. Create trip, no. Update trip, this is the one. Okay, this is where we are right now. All right, so this is kind of where we left off, and let's see what happens when I do try to actually edit a trip. So I'm gonna go to Hawaii 2019, edit this trip, and I'm gonna say instead of going for 4 months or plus, I'm just gonna go for like 3 months. And when I click update trip, let's watch what happens carefully. Right now I have the console view open. Let's see what happens. Okay, I don't know if anyone saw, there was a console log message that said, here we are. And then all kinds of terrible things happened. I saw a bunch of red in the console. I saw a total page refresh. If we look at the network tab, there was no patch request. In fact, let's try that one more time. Edit this trip, and I'm going to go to like just to April again. Here I'm watching the network, and I click update trips. All this main chunk, blah, blah, like nothing happened there that I wanted to. So this is kind of tough. This is kind of a tough spot to pick up, from where we left off. Hopefully, some of you were here at the end of the last session. If you weren't, then I'll be impressed if we can kind of like think about where we need to look here. Does anyone have any thoughts? Like. And there's no bad answers or wrong answers. When you see something like this happen, what comes to mind? If I try to edit something and I click this and like, this is not what I wanted, right? And let me just show you very carefully. Handle submit should be my listener that I'm passing down as a prop from my edit form wrapper to, whoops, I don't have my trip form here, do I? Trip form, there we go. And so we saw this, by the way, flash on the screen. And then we attempted to invoke handle submit here. And handle submit should receive that information, prevent default, et cetera, et cetera. So something's not happening. And can we think about like, what's wrong? Just to be clear, here's handle submit. I'm passing it down as a prop to the trip form. It's coming in as a prop. I'm destructuring it, which means I should be able to reference it, or I should, reference it directly in this case, just like that. So what goes on?
Would it be in the update trip function that you have?
Well, I would say that's a good thought, right? We could look here and see what in the world's happening at update trip, but what I want to point out is, on line 15, I've got event.prevent default. What's the default action of submitting a form?
Redirect.
A redirect. And did it look like a redirect happened?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, look,
Page
because
refresh.
yeah, exactly. We definitely saw a page refresh, right? If we watch this thing, the whole thing refreshed. And look, the URL changed. And if we look at our Rails server, get API v1 trips, get API v1 current user, like all this stuff happened, right? So what does that mean? What does that tell us?
So if you submit, it should be a post, right? Not a get. Could that be it?
It should be a patch request, and you're right to think of like it should have, whatever should have happened in update trip in terms of the request, but that request is never even getting sent. We're not even seeing it. So the fact that I'm passing the event, and the fact that I've got event.prevent default, what should that tell us? In fact, what I'm going to do, we saw this. I don't know if you all noticed, but we did see a console log. Here we are. That did flash on the screen. I'm going to move it here. And I'm going to put it in all caps just to try and before I save that, actually, before I save either of those, just so you can see what I'm talking about, when it was in the, when it was here, we saw it. So let me just show that. If I go to my trips, edit this trip. I didn't save the changes I just made. So we should see, here we are. There it was, right there, right there. Okay, then it's gone. So clearly this thing knows that it was submitted. But when we look over here, and now I'm going to save these two things. So I'm going to save the moving of the console log from this little inline event handler callback function to my handle submit. And let's see if we see in all caps, here we are, right? That's what we're looking for now. So I'm going to go back. Uh-oh, terrible things are happening here. We don't even see anything. Okay. My trips, edit this trip, and let's go to 1018 or 1812. That's not even the date. Let's go to 5. There we go. Update trip. And did we see anything in the console?
A lot of red.
A lot of red, but remember, like before, we saw that console log right away, and we didn't see it now. So now what do we know? What information do we now have?
So we're not hitting this handle submit.
We're not hitting this function. Right? And this is going to be maybe a little bit trickier. Although this is not a Redux issue, this is a React issue. Does anyone see what's missing? What failed here? And in fact, what I could do and what I should have done from the start is if I use React to inspect this element, in other words, inspect my form, my trip form, and I look at the props, do I see a prop called handle submit? It should be there, right? But do I see it?
No.
No. And that's the problem. Here's where I pass it down. Who can spot the problem? What is the issue here? It's very subtle, but really important.
Are you supposed to call this?
Yes. Why? Yeah. Why? You're exactly right. Is that what you're going to say, Joan, too?
No.
Oh, you could have just said yes. No one would have known. You could have just said, "Oh yeah," that's what I was going to say too.
Yes, I was going to say that like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. See, Joan knew all along too. Yeah, it's subtle, and you're exactly right. Why do I need this? Why is this important here?
Is it because handle submit is part of a class component?
Yes, that's exactly right. This is a class component. I have class edit trip form wrapper because I want access to my lifecycle methods. And so when I define a handle submit method here like so, when I reference it, I must reference it using this, not in all caps, sorry, don't need to shout, this dot handle submit. There we go. And now we should see at least something different in our behavior. So now I'm going to click on my trips. I'm going to go to Hawaii 2019. I'm going to edit this trip. And you know what? We're going to stay 3 extra days to the 31st. Let's watch the console. And now when I click on update trip, there's my big caps. And notice we didn't go anywhere. That's good, right? Update trip, everything here looks great. Notice I did get a JavaScript error, cannot read property ID of undefined. I did get update trip, although trip again was undefined. So definitely some good things are happening here, but now I need to clean this up. So that's a problem that sometimes really, we're using Redux, we're using functional components, we're using React, and we're using class components. And sometimes the references get mixed up, especially since we're destructuring things left and right when it comes to these incoming arguments. We destructure our props, and it's easy to get tripped up and confused, and you just got to be careful with your references. And that was a subtle but very important that was missing from our handle submit. So now we've got our console log. Here we are. I can get rid of that one. I can get rid of this one. That was my event. I'd actually like to clean this up a little bit more. There's no reason necessarily to have event passed along. I can just prevent default. If I'm gonna write this right here, I might as well do that. Prevent default. I think I like that. It feels a little cleaner. No need to pass the event. And in fact, there's really no reason to pass the history down, just to pass it right back up, because trip form wrapper has access to history because it already does that. Do I need history passed down? No, because we're passing it back up. We already have, if I'm passing handle submit down into a component that already has my history, I really don't need to pass that either. So this is cleaning up nicely. I actually feel like I like that a little bit better. And so now I can get rid of my history prop. There's no reason to try and destructure it here because, again, the wrapper has access to it. So let's see what happens now. I still have it as a prop because edit trip form wrapper was rendered from a route, directly from a route, which means that it has access to my history prop, as long as I provided it as such. And let's just double check that we did. If we look at app.js, when I rendered edit trip form wrapper right here, I used a render method to do so. I returned my component. And when I did, I grabbed props. These props hold all of the incoming props that would automatically be passed down by route. And I just grabbed them all by spread operating and wrapping in an object. And that gives me all my props, including history. And so I do have it available, which is nice. Unexpected use of event, and that is pointing to line 15. That's because, wait, what? Edit trip form wrapper, excuse me, line 15. I don't need this here anymore because it's not there anymore. This is no longer coming in as an argument from handle submit, so I can get rid of that. It is, I do need to grab it from this.props now, right? There we go, that's better. So now I've got my history. I should still be passing my user ID if I need it. I'm not sure if I need my user ID in this case either. I bet I could just pass form data along. Let's see what happens though. So now let's just kind of have another look. If I try to edit this trip, and now I'm gonna go, wait a minute. So if I refresh this page, go to my trips. Let's stick with Hawaii 2019. It looks like it was actually updated possibly in the back end. So let's just see what happens if I go until, let's just go until October 31st. So we're going from Halloween, from New Year's to Halloween. We're gonna be in Hawaii. When I click update trip, let's look at our network now. And here's my headers for my patch request. Here's my preview. And this looks pretty good, right? It looks like this kind of worked. My end date is what I updated, and that was successful. But what's wrong with this return value? And you may not recognize it right off if you haven't seen some of these episodes already. Why do I say that there's a problem here? And what I'm going to do is draw our attention to like trips. This is actually, yeah, this will work. If we look at one of these trip objects in this array, it looks like we have an object with the top level attributes, I should say with top level attributes of attributes, ID, and type. And attributes has a name, locations, start date, and end date. And if we look at that response we just got, notice that we have updated at, created at, and we're missing things like locations, right? So there's a problem here, which is that we're not getting back the format that we were looking for. So it's time to take a peek at the back end and see what do we need to change now. So if we look at our backend, and I find my API v1 trips controller, and I find my update route. Sure enough, I never really touched this. This is the scaffold generated code. And so once again, I'll warn you about scaffold generators. Either don't use them or be very careful and meticulous only to use and generate the code you want, and be careful to change any code that you don't want. Fortunately, I know that pretty much exactly what I want is the same thing as create here in a response, with the exception that instead of if.trip.save, we do want if.trip.update. And let's save that. And so let's just run through this. I do want to serialize my data with a status of, I'm just going to say status OK. And I do want to build a response of my error messages if there is an error. And otherwise, I do want to, and that's when I would want to actually render this error response with an unprocessable. And let's actually test that real quick. See what happens if I try to edit Hawaii 2019. And I clear out something that's required. Oh, let's double check our requirements actually. For app, models, trips, we need to validate name. Okay, so we don't even validate end date and start date, which I guess is okay. So I at least need to clear out name to test this out. So I'll do that. And when I click update trip, I see name can't be blank, which is perfect. Yeah, if you got to step off, no problem. Have a good night. This is recorded and will be posted. So this appears to be working, and we're okay. And now, and in fact, we stay exactly where we want to with our form still containing the information, which is perfect. So this seems like good news. Like I feel like now we can focus our attention on the action creator, because clearly not everything's happening the way I want it to. So this was Hawaii. We'll say 2021. We'll just completely change this altogether to 2021. 2021 slash, let's see, February, I don't know, 15th. I'll click update trip. And now so the purpose of what I'm doing right now is I want to make sure I get the response I'm looking for. I just checked my error message. That looked good. In fact, we can see that response here as well. Error name can't be blank. That's perfect. Now what I want to see is what's happening or not happening, both of those things, when I successfully edit, assuming this is going to be successful. So now I'm going to click update trip. Okay, we went to the show page. That seems like a good thing. My Hawaii 2019 is there. That seems like a good thing. The response I got was, oops. My attributes look good. I've got everything here that I wanted. That all looks good. If I look at the headers, I've got a 200 response code. That's good. Let's go to new trip. My form is cleared. That seems good. Everything here seems pretty good. So, what if I go to, let's see, let me just double check that action creator as well. Oh, what did I save? What did I not save here? Oh, okay, that doesn't matter. All right, so let me look at my action creator. Here's my success. I updated trip success with the response data. I reset the form, and I pushed my history. And that all seems to be pretty reasonable. Everyone left. Was the time listed correctly? Did this show that it started at 5? It did, right? Did it show that it went for an hour, right? Oh, okay. Hopefully. Was it something I said? Everyone had to go. That's okay. So we're going to continue along. Let's see. So what I'm interested in now is like, let's just make sure that everything works around this type of action. So I'm updating my trips in my Redux store. I'm resetting the trip. Ooh, that's a good question. Am I actually updating my trip? And I think that the answer is actually, let's just make sure that it's true. So let's look at my trips, Hawaii 2021. I'm going to edit it. It's now going to be, we're going to actually stay 2 more days to the 17th and update the trip. And okay, so the trip form cleared, that's good. But what about update trip and update new trip form? And if I look at my state and I look at my trips, oh, you all have a lecture. Okay, got it. No problemo. if I look at my trips, and this was Hawaii 2021, which is trip number 3, so it should be somewhere around here. Which one is it here? So I don't have anything that represents the change of what I should have just had, right? When I updated my new trip, it doesn't look like, in other words, it doesn't look like update trip success really did what I needed to. So here's the action that fired, and I think where we need to look now is our reducer. In fact, if we look at my trips, let's see, Hawaii 2021, remember that I changed it to 217. In fact, we can see in the network that the response came back with an end date of February 17th, but that didn't reflect in my Redux store. So this was Hawaii 2021. I have too many Hawaiis here. I confused myself. But trip number 3 is Hawaii 2021, and it's not reflecting the correct date. And that's because we never finished our action creators, our reducers properly. So now let's see what's going on. So here's the update trip success, which is dispatched on success with the data coming back from the back end, which is that trip object, the serialized trip object. So that's captured in this particular variable trip. And that's what we're firing here. Our reducer should execute, shouldn't be invoked, and we're looking for update trip. So let's find those reducers. I'm going to open that on the left side here. And now back to the front end. If I look in source, components, nope, not components, reducers, my trips. Here's update trips. And look, we have a console log, and I never actually sort of did anything other than return state. So here's where now we have to think about what it is we want to do. So what it is we want to do is update the state of that one particular trip. And so there's a couple ways we could do that. I think the simplest way for updating is actually to just use map. And so what it's going to look like is return state.map. And I'm going to map over each trip. And for every trip, basically I just need a little bit of logic. Is the trip ID equivalent to the action.trip.id, strictly equivalent? If it is, then return action.trip. If it's not, return the trip. So in other words, we're going to map over the entire array of trips that's in the Redux store right now. And map returns a copy, and it's non-destructive, so that's legal right now in our pure function here. And my trip object is what represents each member of the current array. I'm going to compare that ID against the incoming trips ID that I'm passing along here as my action.trip. And if they're the same, they match, in other words, then I'm going to replace it with this new trip, and that carries the new information. Otherwise, I'm just going to return the trip that was already there. So let's save that now and see if we actually see what we want when I go to edit a trip. By the way, we already see that's updating, although that's not actually updating from what the change I just made. This was a new request to get trips because the page refreshed. So now if I click on edit trips, again, we're going to edit trip 3, which is Hawaii 2021. And let's now stay until St. Patrick's Day. So from February to March, when I click update trip, there it is, it's updated. I see now we're staying until St. Patrick's Day. I have no idea if St. Patrick's Day is any fun in Hawaii, but there it is, it's updated, that's good news. So now I'm going to show something else here. If I go to trips 3 edit, notice that my form is blank. Now this may not be very likely that we would end up directly on this URL, but I don't like this and I want to fix it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of lifecycle methods. And we're already taking advantage of componented mount in this wrapper. So let's have a quick look at that, what's happening. My edit trip form container is a class component, and I'm already taking advantage of componented mount. And what I'm saying is, do I have a trip object coming in as a prop? And if I do, then go ahead and populate that form data. Otherwise, don't. And the reason that this is not showing up when I refresh this page is when add init fires, that's my initial render. And when that happens, there's no data. And once that has fired and gone through and flushed through my reducers with an empty set, immediately following, once everything is rendered the first time, all my information comes flowing forth once my get request for my trips and my current user and everything sort of finishes. But component's already mounted, and so this doesn't fire again. And so what I need is a different lifecycle method than component did mount. And if I'm not sure where to look, I'm going to go to my rusty trusty old React docs, reactjs.org, and I'm going to start looking things up. This should be your go-to, in my opinion, for React-based questions. And I'm going to look for a component did mount. There it is. And what I'm going to see here is actually a list of lifecycle methods. And so it's just under the React components section. And we can see an overview here, and we talk about the lifecycle. There are a number of lifecycle methods. The constructor is one, so is render. Those two are not always thought of as lifecycle methods, but they most certainly are. There's a static method, get derived state from props, which I'm not too concerned with right now anyway. Component did mount, we know this is where we make our fetch requests when the component mounts. Notice that there are some unsafe methods, in other words, deprecated methods, that are at least legacy, even whether or not they're technically deprecated, don't use them. But these updating methods are now the ones that I'm interested in. By the way, some of these methods are combined or can be avoided or are used in functional components effectively. I shouldn't say these methods can be used, but we can use hooks now to use a different version and still get the same effect, ironically, because use effect is the hook method that we can use. But we're not using hooks just yet, so we're just going to focus on one of these. And I could look through some of these. Get derived state from props, I don't want. Should component update is a way of maybe speeding up your code if you could basically tell a component not to update, but that's not what I want. What I want to do is tell it to do something. So I got render, and I've got component did update. I'm interested in component did update, so let's look at that one. And it looks like component did update actually gets previous props, previous state, and snapshot. And in fact, the only one I'm really interested in is previous props. And let's actually look at what's happening, why this is failing, at least failing to load the data I want. If this thing loads and there's no trip, the component's mounted and we don't fire off that update the form data in Redux. And once it's mounted, it's that method's never going to fire again. And so what I want is something like component did update. And component did update receives previous props as an argument. I don't have to call it this way, but I don't have to spell it this way, but that's just what I like to do. I like to stick with calling it whatever they called it in the docs. So this is just the previous props. So the situation that I'm looking for, first of all, this.props.trip needs to exist. And it couldn't have existed the last update. So in other words, the previous props, they can't have had the trip, or I won't want this to fire. The reason is if I don't include this next condition, this.props.trip, this.props, previous props. So in other words, if the trip is there now and it wasn't there before, then I want this same thing. Then go ahead and fire off that set form data. In other words, if it was already there before, then it should have already happened here. And so let's watch now what happens. When this page loads, cannot read property trip of undefined. That's because this is just prev props, not this.prev props. Excuse me, React. And now notice that it took a second, but when this thing happened, it updated. This is great. But what happens if I click new trip? Notice now it's still populated. That's not good either, right? So now I have to think about how can I think about a change, or what's the sort of code equivalent, or not code equivalent, how can I, within code, how can I tell React and tell Redux that the change has happened where I was on the edit format, I'm not anymore, so this needs to clear. So maybe I thought about editing this trip, And then I'm like, man, no, I don't want to do that. I click new trip. This information is still here. This information lives in Redux. And so, for example, if this were form data lived in trip form, then whenever trip form were to unmount, then it would just get cleared out. But I'm storing my trip form data in in Redux right here. And so I need to explicitly define where I need to make a change. And in this case, I'm trying to clear the form if we leave the mytrips wrapper. And sure enough, there's a lifecycle method for leaving a component or unmounting a component. So what I can look for is component will unmount. And component will unmount, it's very often used for like killing intervals and things like that. But we're going to use it to clear a form. So now I'm going to say component will unmount. And I don't need any arguments. All I need to know is that when this thing unmounts, I want to clear that form. I'm not connected to the clear form action right now. So let's find it in my trip form actions, trip form, and somewhere in here should be reset new trip form. That's it. So reset trip form, that's easy enough to remember. So I'm going to import reset trip form, which means that because this is an action, I need to include it in my map dispatch to props. I should say it's an action creator, which once I've passed as an object key value pair, second argument to my connect function, will now become available as props, not just the action creator, but Redux will now invoke this thing when I refer to it as from a prop. And now I can say this dot props dot reset trip form. Takes no arguments, doesn't need any. And now what I should see is when I leave my edit form page, so my trips edit Hawaii 2021, if I leave this thing, the component should unmount and fire that action, and it does, and that's good news. Now if I go back to my trips, I can pick another one and edit it. It'll populate. If I go anywhere else, if I make any other change, then I'm going to clear that thing out, and that's exactly what I was looking for. So that's good news. Now I want to show something else. If I go to, I don't know, Australia or whatever, Australia, and let's say I'm going again to Halloween for whatever reason. When I click update trip, notice that now we fired reset new trip form twice. And the reason for that is when we redirected the component unmounted, that's the change I just made. And I had already explicitly done so in the action creator when I successfully update my form. In other words, when I send my fetch request. And there's no reason to have both. So unmounting will happen on a successful trip update. And if we look at the action creator that makes this happen, right, this part here represents success. That's where I was manually resetting the form. But I also, on success, push somewhere else, which causes, if we watch the flow of once history.push happens, app is listening, and app as acting as our controller will now route to a new page. When it does that, it's going to catch this guy, and our old friend edit trip form wrapper will unmount, meaning that it's now going to fire off these lifecycle methods, or I should say this one, component will unmount, which will clear our trip form for us. So I can actually get rid of line 109 here. And I don't think, though, that I want to get rid of the import, because I believe I still want this in my create. Once I successfully created a trip, I also used it. Let's just double check that. And that's not going to change, I don't think. So let's leave that alone for now, unless we come up with any sort of problems with it down the road. Let's see. Another thing I think I can do, let's just double check that this is not wrong. Update trip is what I want to look at. This is still the one we're on. I am sending along this user ID, and my question in my mind is, do I need it? And if I look at my backend, which I don't have open right now, so let's open up my backend, whoops. And I look at my controllers, and I look in API v1 trips controller. When I go to update, I'm updating with trip params. I'm not changing the user ID, and I don't think that's really ever going to change here. So I really don't need it. And my fetch request already goes to the right place. So let's get rid of user ID entirely. which is nice because that means that we can also get rid of it as a prop here. In other words, I shouldn't say a prop as an argument when I submit this form. I should no longer need to pass it along. Wait a minute, I wasn't passing it along. I was grabbing it from the Redux store. Nope, wait, where did I get it from? Form data, user ID. User ID is coming from, do I need my user ID at all? Yes, I need it to create a trip. Although I could just use my current user on my backend. So I'm not so sure I need this at all. That might be a little bit redundant, and I might rethink that on creation. But for now, I can leave it there, but I still don't need to pass. I definitely don't need to pass it along here. And let's just make sure that that's true and I'm not crazy. So I'm gonna get rid of user ID, get rid of user ID here, get rid of user ID here. Save that, and let's see if we break everything when we update a trip. By the way, since we're messing with the trip form, which is used for both creation and editing, once I'm happy with my edit, I'm definitely gonna go back and try and create a trip and make sure it's not broken. So let's pick a different one that we haven't picked on yet. Ooh, look, Colorado has no start date and end date. So let's fix that. We're gonna go in July and come back in July. I'm gonna click update trip. It looks like it still worked, still refreshed. Let's just double check the network response. Still a successful response, a 200 response. Still looks like it updated. It now has start date and end dates, which is nice. So I'm pretty happy about that. If I go to new trip, it's cleared out. This looks like it works. So let's just pick a new trip and let's go to Maine. 2023. So let's go, let's let the water warm up all summer. So let's go in September. Actually, I like to write it this way, 2019, September of 2023, right? September 10th, September 10th, there we go. Let's come back later that month. I don't know if I could type. Cool, and 5-day trip. And if I click create trip, uh-oh, terrible things. Event.prevent default is not a function. And so notice that I did break stuff. And so let's double check that I can actually do the right things. So let's go back to my new trip form wrapper. So edit trip seems to be working, but I did make some breaking changes, it looks like. So let's look now at the new trip form wrapper and see what it needed and what broke. And we can see that we clearly did not prevent default. And that's probably because I moved it to this guy here, and I don't think, well, let's just look. Let's just not guess, and let's see. So handle submit on my new form. Once again, I don't need to pull history. My user, we'll double check on the user ID here in just a second, I think. And if we look on submit, we do need to pass the form data, but we no longer need to pass the event, and we can again just prevent default here, which we already did. Let's get rid of it there. So now I'm just passing along the form data and the user ID. Form data, user ID, I already have the history because I'm destructuring it from new trip form wrapper, which is again rendered from a route, which is why we have access to it directly. And I explicitly passed that, passed the history props along. I should say the router props. That's a lie. I implicitly passed the router props along. When a route renders a component, if I use the component equals, then the props that this thing would supply are automatically supplied, which is nice. So let's see if that did it. Unexpected use of event. I probably didn't save something. Line 9, new trip form wrapper. I thought I got rid of it. I did not because I had it in the console log. Okay. And that looks better. So now let's try to go to main again. Let's go in 2023. Whoops. Let's go in September 9th, 2023. I don't know, October 1st, make a longer trip. Okay, user must exist and user can't be blank. Okay, that's interesting. So what did this thing think? Let's double check now our backend on this guy. Globetrotter backend, app, controllers, API, v1, trips controller. Trips equals, nope, oops, create is here. Trip params, okay. Did I delete my user? Oh, I did delete my user ID. Okay, so let's just see that. So I think that's why I was trip.new. So what I could do is say something instead. If I get rid of the user ID here, and I say, we'll just use the old build method, current user dot trips dot build instead of new. Build instantiates, but automatically associates the object ID from the left side here as the appropriate object ID, the corresponding ID in trips. In this case, the user ID, because a trip belongs to a user, will now be supplied for this new trip that's being instantiated. So let's see if that is a problem or if that did it. It's nice that the form did not reset on failure, which allows me to just submit it again. And now we see that my trip was created. I can edit it. I can update it if I want to. And that's all looking great. Awesome. This seems to be good. It seems to be flowing along. We have a few more minutes, and I'd love to work out delete functionality as well. So I think, to me, let's avoid the ability to possibly delete something unnecessarily or unintentionally, or at least try to mitigate that by adding the delete button to my edit form. So in other words, besides being able to update, maybe down here, like a little red button that says delete trip. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to kind of clear things out here and grab my, what do I want to look at to do this? First of all, I'm going to make sure that my API backend, first, now I'm actually going to set up the backend first. So let's look at destroy. And I actually do want a response here. I would like something like, and I guess I should say if trip.destroy else. And I basically want similar stuff. I'm going to render JSON something, figure out what yet. And otherwise, something like this. I don't know if trip's really going to have any error messages if it fails to destroy. It would basically be, if the trip fails to destroy, it basically didn't exist. So my error would be something like trip not found and not destroyed, or something like that. Something weird. I don't even know how I would actually get to this. But there we go. And I definitely don't need to serialize the trip. I could just say a message like trip successfully destroyed. Something like that. I think OK is a good status for success there. So let's see. So now hopefully my backend is doing what I want it to. Now we need to build this up on the front end. So I'm going to get rid of my controller for the moment. And in my source, in my components, edit form wrapper. Besides the trip form here, I think below the trip form is where I want some kind of a button or something to delete this thing. So what I'm going to do, I could choose to put it on the form itself, but that wouldn't make sense because then it would show up on creation, and that's sort of meaningless. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our friend the React fragment. Oops. What did I just do? Uh-oh, I did terrible things. Okay, React fragment, let's try that again. There we go. And this fragment is going to return the trip form, as well as a button to delete this trip. I'm just going to make a hard code a button for now. It says delete this trip. And on click is going to be something like this dot delete trip. And I don't know if it's going to be this or props or what. I haven't quite figured that out yet. That's okay. Right now it's going to be undefined. Let's go ahead and make this thing red. So I'm going to say style equals, here's where we get sort of this handlebars looking thing. But that's only because we need an object literal here for color red. And let's see if that worked. Oh, it doesn't need, it's an object literal. It does not need the, red is not defined. That's because this is not a CSS file. That's, so I do need actually a string. Great. Delete this trip. There it is. Maybe a couple of breaks in between here and there, so it's kind of separated. This is kind of ugly, but that's okay. It should do the job. Internal server error. Okay, terrible things are happening now too. Ooh, what's this? What's going on here? What's my internal server error? That's interesting. Let's look in our network. We are. Let's look at the headers. A get method to trips 500 error. And if we look in the preview, look at the response, preview, traces, what does this say? What would this will tell us here? Oh, trips controller, line 74. Okay, I screwed up my syntax. App controllers, API v1 trips. Somewhere down here I screwed up. Looks like I have an extra N in my destroy. That'll do it. Okay. And see if that did it. It did. Now I have my trips, right? No. No. Okay. There we go. Now we're in good shape. I should be able to edit. And now I have this button for delete. Maybe that was a little bit too far. So maybe I don't need 3 break statements. Maybe just 1 will do. Let's see what that turns out like. Oops. Okay. Yeah, it's good. Okay, good enough for now. Obviously, I'd probably want to clean this up and make it a little nicer. But for now, we will we'll keep this. This seems good enough. So now I need to make this thing do something. And what do I want to do? I want to delete a trip. And so now I have to think about what does that mean on the front end and what does that mean on the back end? Deleting a trip. So deleting a trip on the front end means that I need to update my Redux store, right? I need to take a trip out of there. On my back end, it means I need to send a delete request so my controllers can remove what's needed from the database. And I just set up that controller action, hopefully to do so appropriately. And so let's put this all in action. So I need to go to my, I know I need to make a new action, and I need to, I should say I need to build an action creator. And with that action creator, I need to send a delete request. So I also will need to handle something or make some changes in my reducer. So I'm going to open up my trips reducer, which I don't have delete trip here yet. So I'm going to split my action creators above. So my trips split up. And so now I can see I always like to see both my reducers and my action creators at the same time. Let's close these up a little bit because we don't need all this. And let's close create trip. Let's close update trip. Great. And so I definitely want something like, I'm just going to copy update trip for the moment. This is going to be delete trip. Okay. And it's not going to be this. For now, I'm going to return state before I figure out the logic I need there. And I need to, let's just duplicate this, I suppose. Just because I'm a little bit lazy. This is going to be delete trip. We'll pass the trip object, I suppose. I really only need the ID, I think. So maybe I'll just grab the trip ID. And I do need the trip ID here. Cool. And yeah, let's see here. So this is going to be kind of like on success. So this is delete trip success, really. So I really need two. This is going to be delete trip success, actually. And the reason for that is I need to send a fetch request, and this is going to fire once that fetch request comes back. So I'm kind of writing these out of order. So I'm going to say delete trip success. These should really be like update trip success, maybe, because this again fires only on successful update. It's kind of up to you. Just pick one way or the other and be consistent. So actually, since I didn't call this success, maybe I won't. I won't actually call it success here either. But I am going to call this thing delete trip success because I do want to call the other one, the actual fetch request, just delete trip. So I'm going to export, export const delete trip. It's going to need to take a trip as an argument, or at least a trip ID. And let's see what happens here. So I'm going to, let's actually split this up to the right. Okay. So now let's see. Blind delete trip is what I'm building here. Whoops, I don't need that open. And what I'm going to do is borrow from my update trip. I'm just going to, and this is where once you start to get rolling and you have a lot of the same code, you can borrow from it. Just be really careful that you borrow exactly what you need. So I'm going to paste this all in. Ooh, I probably do want history as well, by the way, now that I see this, because I'm definitely going to want to go somewhere else. So this is now delete trip. I don't need any data other than nothing because, so I don't need any data. I'm still going to the same place, which is kind of why I grabbed this, except it's no longer going to be tripdata.tripid. It's just going to be trip ID, I think. I do need credentials include. It's now a delete method, excuse me, a delete request. I still want a JSON response. I no longer need to send a body. If there's an error, I do want to see it. Otherwise, I'm going to dispatch delete trip success. Oops. Delete trip success, which is the action creator, whoops, the action creator I just built, this guy, which will then fire off and update my reducers. I do need the response data sent along. And I think I just want to go to like trips, right? No reason to go anywhere else, I think. So I'm just going to go to the index page and I'm going to log any errors for now to the console. I feel okay with that. Let's see if we can first, so I'm going to do this in two phases. First, I'm going to see if I can get my delete trip to work on the back end. And then I'm going to come back around to the front end. I could optimistically render. In other words, I could fire my dispatch and update the front end first, but I don't like that idea because I want a user to see the reflection of the deletion only if it actually happened on the back end. So I am going to wait until I get a positive response from the back end before I actually fire my reducer or invoke. Invoke my reducers to actually delete the trip. So let's go back to the front end and see if this is actually going to work. Delete trip is what I call this action creator, and it needs a trip ID and history. I need to remember that. So let's look at, this is going to be my edit trip form wrapper. Just components, edit trip form wrapper. And so now I need this on click, this.delete trip to actually work. In fact, it may not be this.delete trip, so let's figure that out. I am going to now grab delete trip from my action creators, which means I need to include it in my object for my map dispatch to props. Delete trip, there it is. And which makes it available as a prop, which means I should be able to include it here, delete trip, when I destructure it. Since I'm already destructuring from props, I might as well throw it in there. And now I can just reference it directly here as such, except that I need some information here. Now what I need to grab the trip that I should have available as a prop. So this is going to be delete trip. I'm going to grab this.props.trip.id. That's the ID I'm going to pass along. And I'm already seeing a little bit of a problem here. We're going to have to figure out which way we want to handle this. That's going to be my first argument. Whoops. My second argument is going to be history. And history I should already have available as well, which I am already destructuring here. So I don't know if anyone can see, why is this going to be a problem? Why will this.props.trip.id cause trouble? And let's save it and just see. So when I go to this page, I'm going to get a big old fat red error that says something along the lines of cannot read property ID of undefined. And that's because, again, on init, there is no this.props.trip. So now I have kind of a decision to make. I could somehow create an argument here, and I may want to just do it this way, where if the trip exists, I'm going to assign this, otherwise it's going to be null. And the only way that would really cause any issue would be if someone could click that delete button faster than that initial page refresh comes through in terms of all the fetch requests. So in other words, what I could do is something like const trip ID equals, if there's a trip, whoops. In other words, and this is going to be the prop, right? So this is going to be Trip is coming through as props. So if there's a trip in props, then this is going to be this dot props. Oops, sorry, I already have destructured it. So it's just trip.id, which means that this can just be trip.id as well. So I'm destructuring the trip now from my props. If it's there, then we're going to grab it. Otherwise, then we can just do null. I don't love this. Maybe I can find a better way of doing it, but it should take care of that problem. And let's just make sure now I have trip.id. And even though, oh, no, wait. So this can just be trip ID, right? Yeah, I created a variable so I can avoid this whole problem. Okay, so now trip ID is going to either be the ID coming from the trip, if it's there, or null. So that means that for a brief moment, onClick is going to be invalid. So I would have to click it really, really fast, though, for there to be any kind of problem or repercussion from that. And uh-oh, now I have bad things happening again. Ooh, wait, why are these fetch requests coming? Ooh, oh. Because I invoked it. I need to be a function. There we go. I need to pass these. When you need to pass arguments along, then I obviously cannot just invoke those things. I need to include a function expression, and the body of that arrow function that I just made here is actually where we invoke, not we just invoke. So again, I need to always supply a function reference or an inline function expression as so, like so. Okay, let's save that. See if this feels a little better. So those are the errors we would see if we could click delete fast enough. And actually, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna try it. So now we can see, why didn't we get this form populated? That's a great, that's my question now. Let's look at Redux. So let's try that again. When we load this page, why don't we see that? That's interesting. I thought we had fixed that. So let's just print these up. So this is actually gonna be fun because what I'm gonna do, and just for good measure, I'm gonna grab constructors. So what we're gonna do is examine, we have a lifecycle issue of some sort. And what I'm going to do is console log in constructor. I'm just going to do the same thing kind of over and over. In constructor, props are, and then just print the props. And I'm just going to duplicate this. Oops. And do the same thing in component mount. And do the same thing in component update. And do the same thing in component on now. And do the same thing in render. And the reason I'm doing this is just a demonstration of lifecycle methods. I have 5 lifecycle methods now here. And so I guess I don't need to capitalize this as constructor. So I've got 5 lifecycle methods, and we're gonna watch them all fire. Component did update, component will unmount, and render. So what I'm interested in is why did we not get our trip form populated? That's because props is this dot props. There, okay. Now let's try that again. And let's look at our console. Whoa, terrible things. What do we get? Must call super, okay, fine. Must call super before referencing this. Yeah, React, I know, you're right. Okay, we all know that problem. Okay, cool. So now we can see that we've got constructor, props are undefined. This is our initial payload, which isn't really there. Render, notice render fires right away with an undefined trip. Component did mount still has an undefined trip. Render fires again, still undefined trip. Component did update, our trip is undefined still, and this is where now we still have its undefined trip and it carries all the way through. We never have a trip defined, which is very interesting to me actually. So actually for component did update, I also want to know what my previous props are. Okay, because if the previous props weren't there, if I should say if previous props.trip was undefined, then I should have actually fired this thing and we didn't. So let's Redux, set my trips happens. I swear we had this working, so this is very interesting to me. That's not working now. So we can see that, like, for some reason, in the page that we were on was trips 3 edit, and we're not getting anything loading here. And if we look at our props, the trip is always undefined. Even the previous props, which I look at here, which makes sense that those were undefined, but we never get that trip. And realize that actually, in messing around a moment ago, we actually did fire the delete request for trip number 3, and that's why this is never loading properly. So if I pick any other trip and I go to edit this trip and I refresh this page, we still now, and it's still cool. I'm kind of glad that happened, because now we can see like constructor, render, component did mount, render, component did update, render, component did update, component did update. Those are all lifecycle methods that are firing here. By the way, let's clear out some of these warnings. In component home, I have login and sign up defined and not used. Login and sign up. And what else do we get? In edit trip form, handle submit is assigned a value but never used. Components, edit form, line 39. Line 39. Oh yeah, that's not a prop. That's weird. That's a function. Oh, that was my error that we debugged earlier. Oops. Okay, so apps. Let's see. We didn't in app. We're not using logout, trip form, main container, link, or set for edit. See if I can remember all that. I can't. Logout, trip form. Logout, trip form. Main container, link. Main container, link, or set data for edit, etc. Okay, that cleans up nicely. Hopefully that'll get rid of, whoops, where would I ever, oh, down here, I put it here, but I never used it. So let's get rid of it. There we go. Save that. And I still have line 22 set. Where's that? Line 22? Oh, yep. Okay. Once again, get rid of that. And I've got a console log of that response. Where's that coming from? That is coming from my trips line 53, probably in my actions. Yep. Get rid of that. I'm just cleaning up console logs and unused variables to get rid of all my warnings here, because I don't like having all those warnings. Great, and now I can see a little more clearly. I've got my lifecycle methods as they fire: constructor, render, component did mount, render, component did update, render, did update. And I can see my props each time as I go along. And now watch as well. This is all in the edit trip form wrapper. I should see one more when I go anywhere else, which is component will unmount. And there it is. And that's what actually ends up firing my reset. So it's kind of cool to see those lifecycle methods as they happen and how many times they happen and things like that. You might be surprised sometimes how many renders you get and that type of thing. So let's go back to, let's get rid of all these console logs now that we put them in. And yeah, we can just get rid of them all, I think. And that one, I can get rid of the constructor entirely. I was just using that for the demonstration of an extra, I figured if we're going to look at all these lifecycle methods, let's include constructor. We don't need it though. And finally, let's try to delete a trip or two and see what happens. So main, you know what? Can't go to main, delete the trip. Ooh, syntax error, unexpected token, blah, blah, blah. This is bad news. Maybe. Ooh, well, hold on, we never finished. So, we're running out of time. So, it looks like I actually got the trip back, which means if I refresh my page, I bet it's gone. It's not. Well, I didn't refresh, sorry, if I refresh my page, I didn't refresh it. Now I actually refreshed it. And I think now we should see that trip is gone, main. Yes, it is. So the backend took care of things correctly. So let's look at actually what happened. That's what we never kind of finished, was this guy right here. So let's look at that action creator because we did get an error as well on delete trip. That's because delete trip success. Ooh, okay, let's see. So what was our error message? Let's try and delete another one. I've got too many Hawaiis. We're going to delete Hawaii 2020. Delete this trip. Unexpected token. So I'm getting a response that it's not expecting, which is just, ooh, okay, trip successfully destroyed. That's my, I just got a string response. That's not what I wanted. So let's go back to my backend app, controllers, API, v1, trips controller. When I rendered JSON, I think I just rendered a string. Where was that? Destroy. Yep. So this needs to actually be an object. So I'll just say data, I guess. It really should be like message or something. I should come up with something a little more consistent of exactly what I want to call these types of things. There. Now I should actually get a JSON response. Whoops. Ruby can't take a string and make a JSON response the front end's going to be happy with, but it can take a hash or an object like this. So now, call it data. I guess we'll just call it data to be somewhat consistent. I don't like that it's data, but that's okay. So now if I click delete this trip, well, now it's gone, so I screwed everything up. But now if let's delete Hawaii 2023, delete this trip, and now we see everything seems to be happy, but we never finished Redux. In fact, if we look, Hawaii 2023 is still there. If I were to refresh the page, we should see it disappear. Yeah, it's gone now, which is good. But now we need to finish this reducer. And what I'm passing along here, this is interesting. So I could choose, it's up to me, like I could choose to pull this trip ID that I already have as an argument, because that's actually what I need to pass along here, is not the response data at all. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. I think that's okay. Otherwise, I could return it from the back end, but as long as this is a successful response, I can just grab the argument that I already have, which is the ID. And now, when I go to delete a trip, that's going to be this guy. The trip ID is coming through, so my action.trip ID is what I need. And now I'm going to use, instead of map, I'm going to use slice. So state.slice. And before I use slice, I need to grab a const of my index. So I need to say index equals, I'm going to say, now I'm going to have to look up the syntax. If I look up NDN, index of, array index of, let's just see. I think this is the method I want. So index of return, so it's array.index of, search element though. Ooh, all I have is the ID. So then let's just use, I guess we could use filter. Yeah, let's use filter. So when I'm deleting the trip, either way, I'm going to have to iterate through at some point. So I'm going to say filter. I could use find as well to get the ID. I could use slice. Let's try filter. And I'm going to say, give me the trip who's, give me all the trips. Just return the trips. And let's see, I need a truthy or falsy value. And basically trip .id is strictly equal to action.tripid. If so, return false, because I don't want that in the array. If otherwise, return true, because I do want that in the array. And let's see what happens now. So let's delete, let's get rid of these Hawaii. How many Hawaiis? Wait, I still want one Hawaii. Who do I want to get rid of here? Let's get rid of Europe. Okay, delete this trip and reset new trip form. There's delete trip. If we look at the state, and we look at the diff, states are equal. That doesn't seem right. We still see Europe here. That's not good. State.filter, trip ID. Oh, I wonder if this is coming through as a different type. So what I want to do is console log trip.id action.tripid action.tripid. Okay. That should give me some information. Trip is not defined. What? Oh, crap. Well, let's just look at and see what the action.trip ID is anyway for now. I can't, of course, I don't have a trip there. I can look, but I can look in the, I can look in my store to see what those trip IDs look like. So let's just look at what action trip ID looks like here. And that was a console log. So when I go to my Australia and I edit and I delete, trip ID. Well, how did that happen? Trip ID, trip successfully destroyed. That's my response. Oh, is that what I never, I never saved this. Oh my gosh. Okay. I never saved when I changed this to pass along the actual ID. So let's just comment this out for now and see if it actually just works, which would be nice. Let's delete Canada, delete this trip, and it's gone. And that's good news. And we went where we want. And if I look at Redux, I can see that delete trip actually deleted the trip. Everything is hunky-dory. And so with that, we've now been able to successfully run through full CRUD with a React application using Redux, using full Redux, by the way. We're using, I think, absolutely no React state anywhere, and everything's living in Redux. I don't remember if we stuck some state somewhere, but I don't think so. If we did, that's fine. But we're certainly by and large using Redux. We've got full CRUD on our trips resource. Of course, we've got a long way to go to make this like a nice application. It needs CSS. It's begging for CSS. But I would stick with functionality before beauty. And the next thing I think I want to do would be able to include some locations and attractions, because I'd love to be able to like see people's trips and see what they think of these places and where we should go. So there's sort of like more, we really could add at least 2 or 3 more resources almost entirely. Maybe not full CRUD on all of them, but we could definitely do some nice things here. But this is a really good start. We've got full CRUD on trips, and I feel like I like the functionality. I think I'm pretty happy with where we are here. And I do have log in, log out functionality. So that's where we stand right now. And if there aren't any questions, then I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. Everybody have an awesome rest of your day.